Evening all on PlayChess.com and live stream, Twitch, broadcasting on Twitch TV. I thought we'd go over some Alexander Morozevich games this week. So he's quite a dynamic, exciting player. He's currently ranked 9th in the world. And there's some excellent games at ChessGames.com, a couple of which I've covered before, but we could do a little review anyway of those games. So everything okay on PlayChess.com? Just going to quickly ask. Everything okay? So we're about to go. So okay, so E4. This was against Viktor Bologan in the Russian Team Championship of 2004. So Viktor Bologan was rated 2665, and Morozevich was 2732. So he's been very high up in the world. Hang on, I'll just stop this thing echo. Sorry, he's been very high up in the world. And okay, so E4 C6, Caracan, D4 D5, and we have now the fantasy variation, which is F3. Quite an unusual move, F3. It's got some things going for it. You wouldn't want to play this necessarily against the French defence. You know, if you played E4 E6, I don't think this is particularly as good because of, you know, there's a tactic clearly of Queen H4 check. So against the French it's not a good idea, but against the Caracan it's possible. It's technically possible to play this fantasy variation. So D4 D5 F3 is a candidate move, and you could sort of transpose into a gambit or something. If you play Knight C3 and it's a blitz game, you might get a gambit out of it, but usually it's not going to be played like a gambit. After Knight C3, okay, Viktor Bologan played Bishop B4 here, pinning the knight. So say, okay, at the moment D takes is now possible anyway, because the knight is supporting clearly against Queen H4 check. So Bishop B4 is pinning the knight and maybe renewing this threat that there might be a threat taking, and Queen H4 now that the knight's pinned. Bishop F4, okay, and here Black actually elected to play Knight E7. We have seemingly a solid position for Black. The knight deploying here rather than F6. Okay, here, because this bishop might be dangerous on this diagonal, you might think the knight should be on F6, but Knight E7 reinforces D5. And interestingly, White plays now Queen D3, which would seem to be awkward looking for the Queen and potential tempo gain, especially after this next move B6. It seems logical to try and harass the Queen and do something about this problem bishop on C8. Knight Ge2, and now the bishop did attack the Queen. Queen goes to E3. Okay, both sides now castle on opposite sides, so an exciting position. C5, so it looks like a French defense structure, but with this bishop potentially useful now on this diagonal. A3. Okay, getting the bishop pair. I don't think Black wants to play here Bishop A5, because DC looks as though that might be playable, and simply grabbing this pawn on C5. So actually Bishop C3, Queen takes C3, and we note now that with the dark square bishop and no competing dark square bishop, this Queen's actually got good access as well to a few useful squares, and might later reappear on the king side if needed. This diagonal might also be good later. Generally the dark squares in Black's position, watch out for them and the attacking manoeuvres we're about to witness. It's quite fascinating, this position in terms of dark square manoeuvres actually. Here Black gave up completely now the bishop pair by playing bishop takes E2, because he's preparing now to close up the position. So the question is here, are these knights going to be as effective as the bishops? Okay, to extend the scope of this bishop though, it would be nice to weaken some of these squares in particular. So this next plan, H4, clearly has an idea to sort of try and weaken some squares, maybe get this pawn up, maybe play for g6 even. Okay, b5, but note there's a grip on the dark squares here. This queen can also go back if needed, and it's strengthening the grip on the dark squares at the moment. Queen e1, queen does go back, still keeping an eye on the queen side pawns, but also potentially useful here. Knight b6, and now h5, as though h6 is going to be on the cards, or alternatively just g4, g5. So white has the bishop pair, but this bishop in particular looks a bit impotent at the moment, because this pawn chain is really blocking the bishop in. Queen d7, and this is a typical Morozevich style. Now remember, he's ranked 9th in the world, so he's a high class player, and he's a very exciting player, in the same vein as, say, Nakamura. These two are very, very high rated, very, very dangerous. Probably they have controversial, a lot of controversial openings between both of them, but their attacking style is sometimes a beauty to behold. And here g4, it looks like childish, optimism, but really white is secure in the center, has the bishop pair. d4 is not a problem losing that, because there'll be a pin on the queen. Black tries to keep solid now with f6, preparing perhaps that if g5 to answer with f5 and keep rock solid. Doesn't want any lines opened on the king side, clearly. Bishop f1 now unveils the idea that maybe on this diagonal the bishop will find some effectualness. Rook ad8, reinforcing central control, maybe threatening knight takes d4 at some point. Bishop h3, unveiling the idea that g5 still be on the cards sometimes. But what about this d4 pawn? Now here black did take on d4 and took the bait. Knight takes d4, factoring in clearly that c3, there's knight b3 check if needed. So c3 is out of the question, and white just proceeds now as a pawn sort of gambit, just plays g5. So he's really trying to wrench open these diagonals and try and get rid of these files, maybe open up some lines against the king. Black tries to close things up now with f5, and now we see a quiet move, king b1. Not worried about the knights at the moment. Queen c6, as though, well, this next centre pawn is going to drop. h6, which is starting to put pressure now on these dark squares. These are key dark squares. If white can at some point get on the diagonal, these are going to be dangerous pressure points. Takes, winning a second pawn. So you'll note that both centre pawns have now been sacrificed. We are still in this two knights versus two bishops scenario. So what is going on here? Has the action of the pawns really helped white, or is it just given black this semi-open file, f3, two centre pawns? Is this really serious stuff? I would say to play like this, you need the dynamic player, I believe, needs to expect generosity, as though they're playing blitz games, kind of childish, kind of attacking looking moves, but really quite dangerous to bring results in practice. This isn't how to play solidly. This is how to play kind of very dangerous attacking chess. But what's happening here is that the dark squares are being undermined in compensation for losing the two centre pawns here. And we start to see evidence of that now with queen c3. So now there is a kind of pin being created on the knight, but at the moment it might even go back, you might think, to protect g7 via f5. Or is there a flaw in that? It starts to look as though this might be very dangerous because of the hg's on the cards. Black actually decided not knight f5, but to cleverly use this diagonal to put pressure on the rook, to answer any rook takes d4s now with queen h1. So forcing a tempo loss, it would seem, to delay white's attack. So, I don't know about you guys, but would you be disappointed so far with how this is turning out? Would you prefer in this position white or black? If I give you sort of 10 seconds or maybe 20 seconds to have a look at it, tell me what side you prefer so far. So 20 seconds to have a look at this position and try and evaluate. Do you prefer white or black? Okay, Chess Explained is with us. Hi Chess Explained, I am Chess Explained. He's going to be on soon. So he doesn't like both. The Smoking Gun 99 black spawns are double isolated. Someone says white. Obviously white from Geek. White from White Widow. Okay, no bias there, White Widow. White must win this topis. Okay, well, of course white is going to win this because this is Morozevich night. So I can't hide the fact that, you know, I'm not going to show Morozevich losing, am I? For a start. But no, you can get an objective evaluation of this position, and objectively you might think, well, black is winning, and probably if we put this through an engine, I don't know, is white winning? I don't know. I mean, doesn't knight f5 defend, or, you know, g7, or is this really a problem? Well, now things really sharpen up because white plays a forcing move now. Rook takes d4, just losing the exchange as well. So queen takes h1 check. He's the exchange down, and also the bishop, you'll note, is en prise as well. So after king a2. Okay, this looks like, you know, a dangerous unveiling though of a mate threat. But black believes here he's got time to take the bishop on h3. After all, it was his ingenious move e3 which not only exposed the rook but also cuts out this protection. So why not take the rook? Has Morozevich gone completely crazy? So take the rook and try and defend. So he takes rook. Rook takes d8, threatens mate now. So black's cunning response here. Remember, he's got a dangerous passed pawn now as well. His cunning response against this mate threat is just play g takes h6. Now white, using the last remains of his position, has got a bishop on f4, which does support the next move, g takes h6, which, you know, there's no, you know, it's threatening mate again. And here we reach the climax, believe it or not, the climax of the game, where it seems black's on the brink of just beating off this attack. And, you know, this is an inspiration now to tactical dynamic players, this next move, that sometimes, you know, when it's to do with king safety, there are hidden tactical elements in the position. Now black's next move looks logical, and you know, isn't black going to consolidate here? Because, you know, he's got 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. He's 2 pawns up, and there's no mate threat. And it looks as though rook takes f8 is harmless. But here, I wonder if you can spot white's next move without looking at the game score. So if I give you 20 seconds, I wonder if you can spot white's next move here. So white to play in this position. So riding the tactical trump cards of the position. Okay, anyone on the Play Chess comp server? Can you spot white's next move? If you think of, I don't know if any of you follow my channel on YouTube, I talk about this docking computer concept. Now, when I say docking computer, I don't mean cheating with an engine. I mean, with your brain, sort of looking for forcing moves in the position, and there are certain outrageous forcing moves in this position which you might consider. Of course, rook takes f8 is forcing, but are there any other ones? You might then consider queen g7 check, or even queen f6, because that forces something. But there's another forcing move, really exceptionally forcing. Yes. Okay, some of you have mentioned it now, so I'm going to unveil it now. Queen h8 check. And black, believe it or not, resigned here. So the reason he resigns, it's a very strong forcing move. So if he moves the king, he loses the rook. It's no good to lose the rook here. And then he'll end up, you know, losing the queen probably. Or even stronger might be rook takes f8. In fact, rook takes f8. So that's no good really. Now, so the king takes the queen. Now we would have rook takes f8. two choices for black, either queen g8 or knight g8, and in either case, can you spot the final move? If this had happened, this next move is just mating here, mating 2. Can you spot the mating 2 if I give you 10 seconds? Well, I hope you can, because this is easier now than the previous position. Yes, bishop e5 would be crunch time, supported by the pawn here. So this is just either pawn takes or bishop takes will be mate. So that's an interesting game where it seems you know, the tactical trump cards of the position overcame the defense, stretched the defensive resources to the limits. So let's have a quick look in overview and summary at this game. I believe I have done a detailed video annotation on my YouTube channel. If you want to search on YouTube for Kingscrusher Morozevich, you should find it. I think there might be a playlist by Jessica Fisher Queen. This is one of the games I've video annotated in the past. I was quite impressed with it. So it's a bit sacrificial. Not just in terms of the centre pawns, but you know, just the way the kingside attack evolved here is quite interesting. It's sort of a tale of the unexpected, really. How this diagonal, it seems safe at the moment. It was sort of successfully undermined sacrificially. So it's a demo of how to almost like sacrificially undermine the opponent's dark squares. You know, you get a gradual undermining process we're witnessing here on these dark squares, culminating in an exceptionally logical tactic, basically. So rook takes d4, and then this sequence here with this beautiful finish. So this is sort of one of Morozovich's sort of immortal, you know, games. I think a player is entitled to more than one immortal game. And I think this is one of them, because it's sort of featured on some sites, you know, like chessgames.com features this as one of the top games to look at, and it's quite inspirational. But what got me going today actually is going to be the next game. And I was basically looking at on YouTube earlier today. Chess Noir has a channel, and he's on ChessCube, by the way, and Chess Noir has a YouTube clip, and it's very, very exciting commentary. I wonder if it's like, I believe it's a blitz, it's a 30-minute or something, this game we're going to watch. So Anand, the current world champion, is black in this game, and there's some commentary from GMs. Okay, so on YouTube, so have a look at Chess Noir's channel. I'll just type in, I don't know how long it will remain there, because it might be in breach of copyright, but it is very, very good. Search for Morozevich on this. And Daniel King, who I've been chatting to recently, he did a commentary with one of the great American commentators, Maurice Ashley. And between them, I think they are fantastically enthusiastic about this game. And I don't know what it is, but Morozevich seems to play some of the same openings as me, and I haven't consciously tried to play like Morozevich, but he seems to play the King's Gambit, which I often, sometimes reel out anyway, but I'm preferring the Vienna game at the moment. It seems a little bit more cautious to play Vienna, but F4, the King's Gambit, was played against Anand. I think this was a kind of blitz game. So E takes F4. The gambit was accepted by Anand, and we have two main lines: Knight F3 or Bishop C4. And the Queen invitation check is the scarier of the two, maybe, because with Knight F3 at least you have the comfort that your king doesn't have to move just yet, because you're consciously inviting Queen H4. But this isn't the best move. The Queen can be subject to tempo loss. So really, Anand decided the more solid Knight F6, and then we see Knight C3 developing another piece, C6, and he's going to break in the centre. So it seems Black's going to get the fair share of central control. So white preempts d5 by retreating the bishop to b3 here, and black breaks in the centre anyway, trying to establish a fair share of the centre, so d5. And here, okay, white's a pawn down, but he wants to make sure that this d pawn is not going to cause any more annoyance. He takes it and blocks it with d4. Okay, but is it giving black potentially nasty pin here, getting control of e4 strategically? Bishop b4 is chosen by Anand. Knight f3. Now both sides castle, and Anand voluntarily gives up the dark squared bishop. And it seems statistically, if you do give up the dark square bishop and Morozevich has the two bishops, I think he becomes a little bit more dangerous generally, because I think he realizes with the bishops you just need to undermine a few squares, and these bishops are quite deadly later, so it's kind of dangerous to give an attacking player the bishop pair. So basically, anyway, can black for a moment hold on to the pawn, or is it pointless? Can black actually counterattack with this move, holding on to the pawn for a moment and attacking white's weakness, which he has inflicted on white after all by playing bishop takes c3? So queen c7 looks like a perfectly logical move. Also, you might consider c4 strategically useful later, or generally a blockade and that sort of thing. Okay, so it's up to white to prove some attacking chances here. Now, I find this move one of the most delightful moves you can play, especially in blitz. If you can get to play this queen maneuver, queen e1, it's a cheeky little one square move which is often the basis for really cruel attacks, because the queen switches rapidly to the king side, where it will be attacking like h7, f6. It's crude, but very, very effective. Knight c6, and now the queen shifts to h4. Okay, so we have the basis of a nice attacking position. Also, of course, f4 is now double attacked, ready to be munched. But white is going to have to sacrifice the c3 pawn in return. But once that f4 drops, we'll have semi-open file pressure. And of course, as you'll know from previous videos on my channel, it's important to try and earn your right for your semi-open file pressure. Don't block your own semi-open files by your own pawns like I did in one of my recent over-the-board games. It's important to maximise the piece power sometimes and get the pressure onto the opponent. And here, getting rid of this pawn is going to mean pressure on the f-file. So knight e7, okay, he takes that, attacking the queen. Queen takes c3, fine, it was a double pawn anyway, so who cares particularly. So bishop d2, white's got the bishop pair, there's no nasty check or anything, the queen's evicted back, and then we have knight e5. So what we've got here is this semi-open file pressure now, which is beautiful to have, and also the rooks are going to be looking more coordinated at the moment, for a moment, than black's rooks. The bishops are still looking quite dangerous, a bit more dangerous than before. There's some weaknesses in black's position. Knight f5, and now queen f4. Okay, and it's difficult to harass the queen here. And note that Anand might think, well, he's going to use these two squares. The positional player will think, maybe, okay, there's a downside. If you can establish strong pressure in the centre, this will surely neutralise white's attacking chances. So c4 and e4 are to be clamped down on. The beautiful thing here is that there's an amazingly powerful move coming up which proves the dynamism of white's setup. Bishop e6, as though the clamping down is starting, strategic murder on the light squares. Okay, but we see now a move which is almost, you could almost think of it as part of a later mating net, bishop b4, because it's cutting off the king actually from any escapes. So the plot is being, woven already to create this like mating net later. And that bishop is useful on that diagonal, more useful than this diagonal, which justifies actually queen f4, because it would have been blocking in that bishop from g5. So from b4, that's quite useful, that bishop there. and difficult to get rid of. Actually, the rook moves, and now things are cleared out of the way on the f-file. You just need to clear these things out of the way. This is the next stage of the attack. So here, whilst the previous game was about undermining dark squares, here it's about f-file pressure being exerted. This ferocious semi-open f-file pressure. So g4, clear them out of the way. And with white's centre quite solid, you know, it's difficult for black to counter-attack that easily. And I've noticed this is a kind of trademark of Morozevich, that sometimes his centre's quite strong. And the same with those Petrosian games we saw last week. It's from a strong grip in the centre that you're minimising the chance of counter-attack and damage from the opponent when you go on the attack. So you can attack on chess, but you need to have usually a fortified position in the centre. So knight d6, and now rook ae1, strengthening control of the centre, and e5. So we've got nice semi-open file pressure on these points. Knight fe4, and here it is. Is black really strategically crushing white on these squares? Would you say black's better? Would you say white has no attacking chances? Because I think this next move shows some dynamism for white available, that actually these knights aren't so stable on these squares as it might appear. Okay, can you guess actually white's next move if I give you 20 seconds? So there's a very strong dynamic move here which undermines black's control of the centre. Can you guess what it is here? Anyone? Any guesses? What does white play here? Well, like white wants to get a good grip on the centre, white also wants to release black's grip on the centre. And this next move does that. c4 is trying to undermine black's control of the centre. Particularly this knight is a bit vulnerable. So d takes c4, now bishop c2, and the bishop's got that fine diagonal now, as well as immediately targeting the knight. The knights are squashed back, they're pushed back. Now knight f6, now pushing the knight onto the edge. Our knight on the rim is dim, it goes to the rim. Okay, queen f3, putting more pressure on it, forcing more weaknesses out of the black king position now. g6, weakening some dark squares. Note we still got that evil bishop to stop the king coming out. And now there's a sacrificial unleashing here in the position, which really stunned me this morning actually when I saw this game on YouTube, and I thought, yeah, actually, you know, we should look at some more Morozevich games. So this is quite beautiful now, and quite violent actually. This is violent stuff. So 10 seconds to find the next move here. Okay, this is the start of a really violent sacrificial attack. You need to be a kind of dynamic player to really appreciate this sort of game. This is the sort of game you play chess for if you're a dynamic attacking player, I think. So knight takes g6 is the first sacrifice. Okay, so what has that really achieved? Well, g6 is slightly weakened now. It's only got one protector. It hasn't got two protectors of g6. So you can think that's quite positive. Now, okay, weaken g6 even further. Second piece sacrifice. And also e6 is going to drop off. So that's not really a piece sacrifice like the first one was. So rook takes e6. Now Anand tries to steady the king position now with this next defensive move, queen f7, which is a bit desperate. He did seem to pause a long time here for queen f7. And now the obvious move would be, well, maybe to try and get some advantage from taking, but no, you don't want to take the queens off and simplify, even though you might be better. No, this next move is really powerful. Really powerful next move. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from here. Anyone? Okay, so kind of a double attack actually. Queen d5. So not only attacking the queen, but also putting this diagonal to the check if things were out of the way. So knight f5 now is played to try and parry the f file. But now this final breakthrough move, wonderful move, is played, really crushing. I wonder if you can spot it in this position. What move does white play now? So 10 seconds here. So clue, it wasn't rook takes g6. Rook takes g6, there might be knight g7, and that's defending that knight. So that might not be completely winning straight away. No, there's an even stronger move than rook takes g6. So I'll show you now. Rook. It's a rook move. Does anyone want to guess? Let's turn that. Okay, it's rook takes f5. So now if queen takes, then this is just winning the queen. And if takes here, I think actually g6 is the crushing move here. g6. I don't think there'll be much of a defense here. You know, like this is murder. Double check tactic. g6, and I don't think there's any defense. Unless anyone wants to indicate, is there a defense to g6? I don't think so. If rook g6 had been played again, you know, we've got knight g7 here. So I think it's g6. So anyway, so Anand actually resigned earlier. Actually, well, after rook takes f5, he resigned. So I was quite impressed by this game. Oh, if rook d8, then we can use the check, can't we, to win the queen? End of game. Yeah. White widow, rook d8, rook e8 check, pretty fast. Okay, or even actually, even rook takes g6 is possible for queen takes f7. Okay, so let's go back. So that was from a King's Gambit. Yeah, and there's this idea in the chess world that you know, you should follow these sound openings, which the thing is, most of us are below FIDE 2500, so actually a lot of these gambits, they still work in our club matches and tournaments. They would still work if you're resourceful enough. I believe that you know, you could be more resourceful in the middle game and the end game. You don't have to necessarily play the soundest openings, and maybe this is kind of evidence. And Spassky, actually, Boris Spassky, had a fantastic record with the King's Gambit, but recently, you know, it's gone out of favour. But you know, if you're incredibly resourceful, I sincerely believe that can overcome the bookworms. What I call, you know, the bookworms will spend hours and hours, you know, reading books about chess, you know, openings. But really, if you're like a car, you want a powerful engine, and you know, not using a chess engine. You want to kind of be resourceful strategically and tactically as a greater priority often than the specific book knowledge. That's my view of the game. So Morozevich is one of those players who actually, he plays d4 as well. He's got this wide repertoire, a bit like Bronstein, and I think he's incredibly resourceful, as this game shows, and these attacking games generally show. And we're not just going to see e4 tonight, we're going to see some d4 as well. So this was, you know, an incredibly resourceful game, but I think one of the key points was about undermining Black's central control, because on the surface of things in this particular game, I think, you know, Black had some faith in his position to do with c4 and e4 control, but that kind of illusion was, well, was questioned. We don't really know from a scientific point of view, unless you do an engine check of this game. Maybe Black did have some fantastic defensive resources, but c4 on a practical level, psychological level, human to human, is a very dangerous move, undermining Black's central control and control of these two key strategic squares. And the bishop, if you think about it, wasn't doing anything on b3. It was as useless as some bishops we've seen recently, like short Kramnik. It's pretty useless on b3. So this move is also very, very logical to reroute the bishop to a much more dangerous diagonal. So not only undermining Black's central control, but really giving the light square bishop, you know, much more danger and power. So that's why the dynamic player often uses positional pawn sacrifices to liberate their bishops. That ties up with what I was saying earlier, that do you really want to give a dynamic attacking player the two bishops? This is what can happen. You know, your knights can be put on the rim, and then you can be exposed to a brutal you know, sacrificial attack, which is just completely impossible to defend. So Anand couldn't defend this. Rook takes f5 was the final, you know, nail in the coffin. So that's a really crushing move, getting rid of all the blockades, and that's the signal. Once the blockades are removed, you know, that's it. The breakthrough sacrifices will smash through. So, you know, those of you who like defense, you know, let this be a warning to you that, you know, sometimes it doesn't matter if you've got a seemingly solid position. You know, you can be completely smashed through, you know, these sacrifices, because the king is a very vulnerable piece, really. And I think that's another thing these games demonstrate. But let's have a look at another game. So that was Morozevich Anand, played in the Kremlin, Moscow Kremlin, 1995. But let's look at another game. So this time, another key game, very high profile opponent. You may have heard of him before. Vladimir Kramnik. So he was exactly the same rating as Alexander Morozevich at the time of this game, 2788. So can you imagine, Tau Memorial of 2008, they were both 2788. Blimey, what a FIDE rating, 2788. Okay, so anyway, we get a very solid opening from Vladimir, as you'd expect. Vladimir, playing black, tries to rely on the super solid Slav defense, which is super popular at the moment. So knight c3, knight f6, and it all looks as though it's going to be a quiet, dreary game for a moment, especially with White's next move doesn't seem to promise much, e3. So what does e3 actually do? It sort of locks in the bishop, but usually if White plays e3, White is expressing an interest maybe in a quick, sometimes in pressure on the diagonal, and a quick e4 sometimes later. Also, you know, sometimes the castle cheekily queenside. So here, anyway, I don't want to spoil things. Let's go through the game. e6. It also, of course, comfortably protects the c4 pawn. None of this sort of speculative gambit business. So knight f3, knight bd7, and now the queen plays to c2. So we have, well, delaying, you know, because if bishop moved immediately, you know, maybe dc to gain a tempo. So a little waiting move, queen c2. Bishop d6, Black's following a standard plan, really. There's a kind of template plan in the Slav of sometimes taking and then playing e5 straight away, or at least that often occurs. But here there's a little surprise move, which shows, I think, you know, Morozevich is, you know, just slightly mad. He's slightly mad. This next move demonstrates that. I wonder if you can guess White's next move here. If I give you 20 seconds, what does White play here against Kramnik? Okay, yeah, okay, there's an attacking move. So not bishop d3, which you might expect, but remember, black's always got dc's and maybe b5 later, and it's kind of annoying because maybe there's also e5. No, none of that, no. g4, g4. And it sort of looks, you know, does black just ignore it, just castle? I don't know. You know, g5, you're giving white some space here on the plate. You don't really want a knight on the rim, and you can't play knight e4. And white would, you know, then attack h7, so you can't really castle into this and just ignore it. So you can either take the bait, and also positioning. You know, if e5, you know, g5 would be dislodging knight from d5 control. You know, what would be exerting more pressure on d5? So. Okay, so g4, maybe it's normal now, but it looks a bit outrageous, I think. You know, some people would say this looks a bit outrageous, this queen c2 with the idea of g4, but I think it has become a normal part of opening theory. Alright, okay, so Chess Spain says it's played by almost the top GMs now. Okay. Alright, so knight takes g4. It offers white some dynamic play. So rook g1. So we've got dynamic play going on here. So knight takes h2, offering, so it's a gambit. We've gone into gambit territory. So white's a pawn down, but with good compensation. Okay, so knight f8, protecting that h7 pawn for a moment. Rook g2, so we've got a gambit. And now e4, so white has nice control over the centre, and the bishops are looking good here. These bishops, and this e5 looks good. Knight g6. Bishop g5, dart square bishop exchange, so weakening the dart squares on both sides after this, if this is taken, and it is taken. Bishop takes e7, and now castle's queenside. So black now releases that tension in the centre. Maybe he's not looking forward to e5, so he takes on e4, and it looks a bit rash actually. He's played f5. It looks a little bit rash from Kremlin. But he's got the idea of playing c5 here, because maybe this bishop can come out after c5 via c6 on this diagonal. I think that's the idea, to play c5 anyway, as evidenced by the next move. After d takes c5, now if d5, I think black can adequately reply with e5. Keeping the pawns together intact is very, very nice. But this next move, okay, d takes c5. Now bishop d7, not recapturing, but just trying to get the bishop improved, and it will be with tempo on that rook on g2. But can this pawn actually be protected outrageously? Because you know the white king over here, you might think you don't want to move these two pawns because you castle queenside. But this is exactly what white does now. He plays b4. So tactically, somehow this is working out. You might think, well, surely like a5 is quite dangerous. But maybe, you know, maybe white just plays a3 and it isn't such a major disaster. So actually Kramnik wasn't even tempted for a5. He just castles queenside himself. And now we have rook g3, which is very nice, swinging the rook potentially to useful squares, but also maybe even the d file if needed. e5, and actually rook d3 is played now. Bishop e6, and now, funny enough, not interested in the rook exchange, just rook a3, attack that pawn, a6, and now a breakthrough move, because that weakness of the last move, it's not controlling c6, is it? So what does white play now? A kind of weakness of the last move. Okay, so white plays now. If I give you 10 seconds, what does white play now? This is quite a sort of painful move for black. The king position, mind you, also sort of painful for white as well, potentially. So what does white play now if I give you 10 seconds here? Okay, white. Remember, weakness of the last move. The last move being that's a clue. The weakness of the last move exploited with c6, of course. So it's undermining the local pawn chain to the king. So b takes, alright, but of course b4 is under fire. So do you really want to take this? No. c5, leave that threat, celebrate that threat, that pawn, and also liberate the bishop. Look at that bishop again. Beautiful bishops is a trademark of Morozevich. Once he uses his pawns, pawn sacrifices and breakthroughs, and his bishops blossom in the position. And the bishop's blossoming here. No, you don't. Once there's a pawn as a fixed target, you can celebrate that. You don't need to immediately go and capture that. You want maximum advantage when you do take that pawn, but not being in a rush to take the pawn is important. Like pins, like recaptures, like I've sort of mentioned recently. This idea of celebrating things that you have to get the timing right. Sometimes you can celebrate those elements with maximum advantage. So here, without any controversy, shutting down the queen, still keeping a6 as a fixed target. Now queen g5 was played, which seems to tie white down quite nastily. Isn't that a nasty pin and win? Well, rook takes a6, and unfortunately, black's position is looking a little bit more precarious now on the king's side. King d7, and this doesn't look good if the king has to make a run for it now with king d7. Bishop c4, okay. Bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, and now there are numerous threats like check, knight e7, trying to cover things up. Now unpinning the knight is pinned, as you'll note here, so unpinning quietly with king c2, so the knight is now threatening various checks like to win the queen. So the king's not in a good place. It tries to make a run for it. The queen is attacked nevertheless. And note, we've got this nasty idea of rook takes d8 now. Queen f6. But this is the funny thing, actually, in this position, that you don't want to give black any defensive resource at all. So actually, rook takes d8 might not be the strongest move. I wonder if you could spot white's next move here. You want to celebrate your use of the d file actually, and other forcing moves available to you, which might be equally destructive as the most obvious forcing move. Now the most obvious forcing move is rook takes d8, but there's a more subtle forcing move which look at this rook. Sometimes this rook, it's only protected by the queen, isn't it? If you look at white's position, analyze it, just do an internal audit of black's position. How is it being held together? The king is kind of precariously placed. The knight doesn't look that good. The queen is protecting the rook. That's only one of the few defensive resources, that rook on the d file. So white's kind of peering in. He's got all these threats peering in to black's position, hasn't he, at the moment? But what is the move that white plays here to try and finish black off? So if I give you 10 seconds here, what is the move that white kind of really helps break the black position here? So 10 seconds starting from now. Anyone? A forcing move. We want to try and decoy the queen potentially away from the protection of h8. It's a little clue. Okay, yeah, rook d6 was played. Rook d6. Because remember, you've also got rook a8. So Kramnik tried rook takes d6 here. Now, why did he play rook takes d6? If he plays queen g7, I think queen g7 releases control of e8. So maybe this works here. This might be crushing to play queen e6 here, because then there's queen d6, there's knight e5. That looks horrible. Also, there might also be even more clinical moves like check and then queen a6 or e6. So this is pretty horrible, this idea of rook d6. So Kramnik took on d6, and after c takes d6, black actually resigned here. Now you see, one idea is queen takes d6, check just wins the rook. So look, that's stronger than before, because you know, if we had done in this position rook takes d8, then it's giving black knight c8 as a free resource to use, you know, for check knight c8. Why give black this resource? Why? No need. Rook d6 is much more crushing, it would seem, but I haven't engine checked this, but it looks as though it sort of overloads the black position. Rook d6. So rook takes d6, c takes, and that was it. So let's have a look in overview and summary at this game. So I thought it was quite dynamic from the start, and apparently g4 is become sort of part of theory now, this idea. So queen c2, very exciting approach to breaking down the Slav defense. Something very handy to note, this quiet looking e3 as the basis, you know, for a very exciting early g4. So we get a gambit system basically against the Slav defense. So you sacrifice a pawn, and it looks pretty dangerous actually. So bishop e7, the dark square bishops came off, and black, you know, has that problem bishop, which usually is a problem. Tries to get rid of it with c5. It looks pretty nifty, this idea, bishop d7 to c6. But white's pretty resourceful in holding on to that pawn until the right moment. To now use this bishop e6, perhaps that was an inaccuracy or something, but bishop c6 would run into b5. Maybe he was worried about b5 and c6, so maybe he thought the bishop was quite good there. But this c6, it starts to be looking very problematic, because white's pieces look to be around black's king here in this position. So Kramnik seems to have neglected slightly his king safety, and that was severely punished now. So rook d6, and it's all over. Okay, let's look at another game. So Ivan Sokolov. There were two Sokolovs that were really strong. I think Andrei Sokolov. There were two Sokolovs really strong. This was in the Qe1 Rus chess tournament of 2005. So Morozevich was playing black, and I just really now you see, I feel a lot better, yeah, if Morozevich is playing the Albin counter gambit, you know, because I love the Albin counter gambit. You see, there are a lot of evil players out there, like Chess Explained Right, in this position, who won't play c4, and when that doesn't happen, you know, it's like they're trying to crush your spirit when they play knight f3. They're trying to say no Albin counter gambit for you. You know, they're trying to crush your spirit from move 2. They're trying to say there's no gambits. You're not going to have fun. You're going to be positionally ground down after knight f3, keeping an eye on e5. Now, if someone does play c4, now most people are kind of, you know, on ChessCube do play c4, not really realizing how dangerous the Albin counter gambit is. So you can play e5 because knight f3 hasn't been played. So really for blitz, c4 is actually can be considered a blunder. Actually, c4 is a blunder because it doesn't stop e5 here, which is the Albin counter gambit. yeah. I had good results here over the board with the Albin counter gambit so far this season. I had nearly 2 wins, one crushing win, and 2 draws against the same person, who was very lucky in one of those to draw. He should have lost, so it should have been 2 wins and 1 draw so far. So I really love the Albin counter gambit. So e5, okay, so Ivan Sokolov, alright, so you can play this gambit as black, and you might think, well, what's the point? Okay, white just takes it, which is the main move. So d4, and you see what you've done is you've dislocated black, you know, white's resources. They're split. This pawn is splitting the white resources. Imagine this line through the center. There's this extra pawn here, and if you ever win this pawn, it's important to have semi-open e-file pressure on e2. So when you win this pawn, don't try and win it with f6 and f takes. That's one thing I've learnt recently. You don't want to shield the e-file. When you want to win this pawn back, you want white to experience the full blast on the e-file. That's one principle of the Albin counter-gambit, which I think is a subtle thing. I can't get rid of these arrows, so we're going to have to move on. So knight f3, knight c6. Now for the moment, how do you get to the e5 pawn? Actually, you can try f6, or you can try this, or you can just try and grimly hold on to d4. If white decides to play evil moves like this, you might have to play defensive moves just to hold on to your d4 pawn. So you have to be quite careful here about knight bd2. This is one of the more subtle evil choices. Really, the intention is to unveil treble attack on b4. So you've got to be prepared for this as the Albin counter-gambit player. You've got to be prepared to defend your d4 pawn for a moment longer. a3 is another critical move, as Chess Explains just mentioned. a3. So, you know, trying to discourage black from casting queenside and stuff. But knight bd2 is another annoying move. So in this game, the recipe for black was to play knight ge7. So it's going to be able to answer knight b3s with knight f5. Okay, so knight b3, knight f5. And now, of course, white has blocked in the b pawn, so you can celebrate that, because now a3, there's no b4, I have to move this knight out of the way. Ha ha. The knight is blocking the b pawn. But he plays a3 anyway, maybe to stop annoying checks and stuff. And, okay. So bishop e7, and now g3 is played. And now black decides, well, you know, with that poxy knight on b3, well, you know, isn't that a tempo gain with a5, a4? Well, you know, why not? You know, seal up the light squares. You know, put pressure on c4 later. c4 is going to be a target. So a5. And now white plays a blockade with his queen. And now Morozevich says, you know, if you're really desperate, you use the queen's blockade. Otherwise, you should really blockade with a less of a noble piece like a knight. You shouldn't really use the queen's blockade. But in this particular position, you know, because of a3, it's more justified the queen as a blockader of the d pawn for a moment anyway. So a4, knight bd2. Now h5, and it looks as though, well, white has got e4 as a potential trump card, and actually plays a non-routine move, bishop h3, justifying the queen even more. Okay, that has to be supported, weakening some dark squares. So is this evil positional play from white, prompting dark square weaknesses? And now knight e4 seems to fit very nicely with the idea maybe later bishop g5, weaken these dark squares even more. This knight looks good, the queen looks an adequate blockader of the d pawn. Okay, so Morozevich, he plays h4, whoops, h4, so he's extending the scope of his rook, maybe threatening hg at some point. At the moment hg will protect h3. Bishop f4. Black decides to play hg anyway. Hg. And now a curious move, knight g7, as though there's a rerouting, there's an invitation to exchange off bishops. Well, actually that's not possible, pardon me, rook takes h1 would be embarrassing. Sorry about that, rook takes h1. Let's keep an eye on the ball here. After knight g7. Okay, so bishop g2, protecting the rook. The rooks get exchanged off. And now bishop f5. Now still there's this idea of knight e6 to try and protect d4. And also knight c5 might be on the cards later. Knight fg5. Okay. So discouraging knight e6 for the moment maybe. But this other knight can be used quite niftily now, because a slight weakness of this last move, that the pressure was taken off d4 that just then, so the queen is protecting that, that's attacking that. Free knight here, it's used, knight a5. So now this knight can come into b3 and protect d4 as well as threaten maybe knight c5 at some point. Queen f3. So the pressure's totally been taken off d4 now. Knight e6. Now this knight goes on an excursion, I don't know, knight h7. Okay, but is it justified? Is it in going into f6? But Morozevich decides that he can afford to give up the light square bishop and try and stifle this diagonal with the move c6. So he's kind of trying to neutralize this diagonal and use his knights now, Morozevich and knights, which is a contrast from previous games. So how can these knights be used effectively here? Well, d4 is one centralization target for both knights. After knight b3, hitting the rook. So both knights are in touch via d4, rook d1. And now also note the king in the center is subject to being checked. Knight ec5, and it looks a bit dangerous now, all these tempo gains. And there's also the potential for d3 check. So this is quite delightful. But even worse now, what has been neglected in the white position is this c4 pawn, which can now be attacked. I wonder if you can spot the next move. White seems to have forgotten about his c4 pawn. And this knight, I don't know, has been forgotten about for a moment as well. But how do you exploit the c4 pawn if I give you 10 seconds here? What does black play here? Which is quite nifty. Yeah, it's not incredibly hard tactic. Just queen a6, because that king's also behind it, so that would be a dangerous diagonal to get on. The king makes a run for it. Now this is always a good sign for the attacking player. If the opponent's king has to make a run for it, you know that's a good sign, and they're probably in time pressure, and they're probably, the handwriting's going to pieces at this point. They're probably a bit nervous, and this is where you know you have to be like a vulture, on the lookout for the weaknesses of the last moves, the final cracks that they're going to make for you to break through the position. So the psychological pressure is building up here. So queen takes c4 check, king g1. But we've got another valuable asset here. Even if the king runs away, we've got this valuable asset. We've got this big d pawn. So queen c2, heard the d pawn now. This is another asset you get from the Albin counter gambit. Okay, so queen f3 protecting the rook. d3. So all of a sudden it looks as though d2 and rook d8, this is all pretty dangerous stuff. Bishop g5, as though, well, what about these dark squares? Yes, what about this knight? Justify this knight. If this queen and knight can coordinate, that's pretty dangerous for the black king. Knight e4 was played here. Knight e4. That's avoided because the queen's kind of having to protect the rook on d1. So if queen takes, there's queen d1. But it also usefully defends f6. So if this is taken, f6 is defended. So there's no queen f6. So that's a very nifty move here. Not only that, the knight also helps coordinate on f2 threats. Okay, so nice move, knight e4. Bishop takes e7 without worrying about f6 at the moment. But black doesn't even bother recapturing here. He just plays knight takes f2, threatening to win the rook or something. We'll take here, and then this pawn is looking more dangerous. So the queen took, queen takes d1 check. Now queen c2, offering an exchange of queens. The bishop goes out of the way of the king munching it. And now, funny enough, I know it's a bit late in the game at move 32. Black now decides this is a good time to castle. So he castles queenside here. because actually the queen's a bit tied down to the king at the moment. There's this big huge passed pawn, and also now there's a threat of rook h8. So funny enough, after king g1, black could afford to create, this is a weakness of the last move, king g1, because there's a weakness created because this bishop's going to be loose on the same file here. Black just takes on f2 and plays rook h8. He's scooping up a piece. This silly knight on h7 is finally exploited, and here white resigns. So clearly the Albin counter gambit is a lot of fun. It's a great fun opening. Clearly it has the support of top 10 players in the world like Morozevich, and I don't know about Nakamura plays it, but at least Morozevich plays it. So what a fantastic opening, the Albin counter gambit. So this is just, there are many systems for white, but this is an annoying one, knight bd2. Okay, so knight ge7 might be a good idea to try and support that d pawn, and yeah, it's kind of tactically very interesting game. And also I like, you know, these knight maneuvers, going back to the center, going off on the edge, but white's sort of offside knight didn't do so well on h7 clearly. So once the king started to run, it was trouble. But I suppose one of the beautiful moves was knight e4, which really solved a lot of black's technical issues here, as well as counter-attacking on f2 and sort of celebrating the pawn more. This knight e4 was a key move, I think. So, and then knight takes f2, you know, absolute brilliance, really. Because also, you know, you can imagine if white tried to sort of get in, there's things like check, you know, check, and then queen takes d1, you know, that would be pretty nasty. So there was no time for white to get into the black king position, and casting so late was pretty, you know, spectacular in its own right, I think. Okay, so we see the final position quite aesthetic. A bit reminiscent, I suppose, of one of the famous Alekhine games against, I think, Retting Alekhine, where in the final position white was losing material. So anyway, let's go on to another game. So against our Alexeyev. So Alexeyev is just one of those, you know, 2600 players. I don't know if he's 2600 at the moment. So so Morozevich was playing white, and the Sicilian was played. Knight f3. We have an open Sicilian. So this is all pretty standard so far. Oh, I will upload this after to YouTube from Kingscrusher if you want to review it later. I'll put all the PGN in the description of the video. We'll have a PGN, okay? So if you want to examine these games later, okay. So knight c6. Now this is classical, I believe, 4 knights variation. So the 4 knights have been developed. And actually I have a video on the Sicilian about to be uncorked tomorrow on the channel, going over the main named variations of the Sicilian. It's a 1-hour video. Look out for that tomorrow on YouTube. So the 4 knights variation. But here white plays f3 here. Okay. Chess is this a normal move? f3. I'm not totally sure. f3, it probably is pretty standard, but black reacts with e5, weakening you know, d5 slightly. So knight b3, bishop e7. Now if black can sort of weaken the dark squares, get rid of this, you know, maybe these squares are going to be quite weak for white. But bishop e3, bishop e6, queen e2, blocking in his own bishop. So you'd think, maybe you'd think, you know, queen d2 is more logical, but actually, you know, queen e2 was played. Now castles, and now white castles queenside. Knight a5. Now interesting, their tactical move. You see, one of the points, if we looked at this queen d2 here, you see the rook, when it comes to d1, when this rook comes to d1, it hasn't got the d file because the queen's in the way. But you see, and that might be useful for knight c5s, but the queen's in the way. Now here we have a position where actually this queen e2 supports in this position. I wonder if you can guess this next move. What does white play here? There's a slight subtle nuance about the queen being here, with this rook blasting down here. What does white play here? 10 seconds. Anyone? Yeah, knight c5. Okay, so bishop c4. So we have a light square bishop invitation for the exchange, which will weaken d5 a bit further if that is taken up. So black's maybe not totally keen to give up the light square bishops just yet. Plays actually queen c7. Now the knight just comes back. Knight takes b3, a takes, bishop e6. Okay. g4. So white's still maybe trying to undermine d5. You can dislodge this knight. Rook fc8. g5. So control of d5 is at stake here. Knight d7. King b1. You might think, oh, these pawns are a bit dangerous. This structure, is it a bit dangerous? It's difficult to prove. If it's difficult to prove, maybe it's not so dangerous. So h4. We've got a standard idea of h5 and g6, which would wrench open files against the black king potentially. So queen c6 was played here. Rook h2. Interesting move. Now these are subtle moves. Maybe the rook's going to be putting pressure on there. Maybe, what is going on here with queen c6? Is the d5 being prepared? Maybe knight b6 d5. We're about to find out. So b5, h5. Now one idea is unveiled, that this bishop can now reroute bishop d8. And you can actually reroute, in fact, to a5. So now pressure, a nasty pin on e1 has emerged. Queen h4 unpinning and offering the c3 pawn. But there's a lot of pressure here. There's a lot of threats. There's a few threats with the pawns to deal with. Black does take on c3 though. Interestingly, there isn't the ordinary recapture here. White plunges ahead to try and rip open the lines now, h6. So we have a lot of pawn tension going on now in the position. A lot of pawn threats. And it seems as though rook h2 is proving itself useful, that c2 is protected. If this bishop ever moves, at least c2 is protected as well. So f takes g6 is played. Now h takes g7 threatens mating, well, taking and then g8, queening with double check. So h5. And now again the bishop is left there on c3. White is just wanting to get into the black king position, using the best resources, where resource like pieces and ideas, around the squares of the opponent's king. It's a very primitive form of chess, but very effective. So the king took on g7, and now white finally takes here, but notice he's got access, he's got luxury access now on the dark squares. Check. And now he smashes through. Actually, rook takes h5, threatens immediately to mate, so black takes the rook here. But now look, we just need to get a rook on the g file now, so why not with speed? Bishop takes b5, attacking the queen, so we can get our rook fast on the g file. And the double pawns are a great asset here, because otherwise queen c2 would have been quite annoying. It's good we've got a pawn here. So a takes, and now check, and it's really all over. Black's king is fried here. After check, black resigned. He's getting mated. It looks as though this is a simple, like, it's splat, So what on earth happened there? Why did it happen? How did it happen? Was black too luxurious with the maneuvers? Bishop d8, a5, all this business. Was it too slow? Did he subtly weaken his king side? Well, we can have a look at that again, I think. So let's go back and look at this again. So it was a Sicilian with a slight difference of the queen going strangely to e2. So we get great fun with the kings on opposite sides of the board. A lot of fun attacking games with kings on opposite sides. So it's like a race now to break through. So knight a5, and white wasn't concerned about the double pawns at the moment. So knight c5, but I don't know what objectively was the advantage of the knight going to c5 and then going back. Did it actually gain anything, can we say? Does anyone know what it gained? Did it gain a tempo? It encouraged the bishop to attack the queen, so the queen went maybe to a more ideal square, or did it? So the queen is having to spend time to chase the knight. The knight goes back. Have we really improved the situation? White's inviting the double pawns. I think there's a tactical disaster here on bishop e6. Actually takes. There's knight d5, almost a tactical disaster because of this knight e7 check if queen takes. But queen d8 might be adequate. So I don't know, black decided to take here. Okay, maybe it's not so bad for black here. We've got a typical English attack situation. Now, one of my favourite games from the Lloyds Bet Masters, I played the English attack against Morozevich, who was 24-20 at the time, and I completely destroyed Morozevich with the white side of the English attack. So I was prepared just a few minutes before the game by this British IM who just said, you know, Morozevich plays a bit passively, the Sicilian, just use this English attack system. And I played this like thematic stuff, and it was really a joy to play and open up the lines, and then try and find the tactics to finish off. But you've got to get the lines open first before looking for tactics sometimes. So this is a great tactical breakthrough first, this preliminary idea of playing for g6 to open up the lines. But black's counterplay, I don't know if it was too slow here, a6. How does black speed up the attack? Maybe black could have sped up the attack, but it seems a bit slow how he played it. Easy to say in retrospect. So queen c6, clearly with this idea, might not be the best. I don't need an engine to check it or something. But rook h2, so prophylaxis against c2, so the knight's kind of freer to move out later. But at the moment, knight d5 can be answered just by bishop d8. So Morovich just carries on, not minding all this stuff to do with c3. He just carries on, and he just opens up the lines with h6. So forcibly gaining, you know, tons of tension in the position, tons of tension, and black has to react to this, otherwise he's going to get mated. So all the dark squares, in fact, have been totally undermined as a result of this operation. You know, h5 looks terrible because look at these dark squares now in black's camp. They're a bit weakened, aren't they? So when white finally gets that piece back, it's with advantage, and now it's just technical. It's a technical exercise just to break through to the king. So just sack a rook, sack a bishop, and you got a mating net ready made here. So that was a fun game. So I thought these are quite good. These games. These are some of the favoured games of Morozevich so far. Okay. Shall we have a look at another? I can go on a bit more, I think. Possibly. One more, or maybe carry on next week. What do you reckon? Alright, okay, I've got to show you this. I've got to show you this because this is just validating my opening repertoire, all my old opening repertoire, because I used to love the burn variation. I was a real addict with this burn variation. Okay, so there's this British IM Gary Quillen, who once showed me this burn variation as black, and it gives black a dynamic game in the French defence. So what is this burn variation about? You see, the Morozevichian twist is very interesting and strategically important. You play knight f6 and you don't play bishop e7 here, because you could end up with well, facing Alekhine-Chatard gambit and all sorts of nasty things. No, you don't play that. You take on e4, so you get double pawns, but with a very dynamic position here. So you accept the double pawns, and as many of you know, I've won countless games against FMs and IMs mostly on the ICC, but sometimes I'm not sure I've beaten a GM in this. Maybe I have, but okay. So this is really dynamic. You know, this idea that you know potentially you got this diagonal, you got this G file. And actually, we've covered this game on the YouTube channel. This was against Judith Polgar when she was 2658, the Nc3 RUS tournament of 2000. So a6 though is the twist, which does discourage the bishop c4 lines, because black is trying to get a kind of bind on the light squares, and these two squares are kind of key to keep focus on and grip on. Okay. So the solid idea now white uses is to play g3. So Judith does this, and now b5, bishop g2, bishop b7. Okay, so there's a sort of bind on the light squares, discouraging c4 breaks, which I've noted in some of my videos. If you sort of had played the standard b6, sometimes white does play something like this: bishop d3, queen e2, bishop a6 later, castles queenside, c4 and d5, and if you take, you get totally shattered pawn structure. So d5 is a thematic break, but you see a6 really is trying to get a bind on some of the light squares to discourage white from playing c4 and d5, which could dismantle your pawn structure for black. You don't want d5 coming at you later, especially when white robs you of the bishop pair by playing this plan bishop c4, queen e2, bishop a6 if you play the b6 plan. So this is a very interesting idea which needs to be given serious theoretical attention, I think, this a6 move. And I think Nigel Shorts used it recently in the Gibraltar tournament with success, when he shared first with Yifan Hu. So g3, b5, okay, we'll follow this game. And now black actually castles kingside, because castling queenside is a bit riskier, moving these pawns like this. There's always a4 to wrench things open. So castling kingside is important here. Rook ad1, and now bishop d5, highlighting immediately actually a threat to win the exchange. Okay, so king h8. Knight ft2, now c6. So wanting to get this bishop exchanged off for the bishop on d5 and recapture, maybe use the c file, maybe strengthen control of c4, maybe knight b6 later to c4. So c4 is played though here, fracturing the structure anyway a little bit. So black's structure is a bit fractured here. a5, he's got dynamic play and compensation, he's got b file pressure. Okay, he has got double pawns as well. He's got isolated pawn here. It's a bit of a wreck, the black pawn structure, let's be honest. But it's pretty dynamic. So knight c3. When you play this stuff, I think the psychological ingredients of playing with wrecked pawn structures and dynamic openings in general, I think it is to expect some kind of generosity later, that the opponent is not going to play like a computer necessarily. The opponent is going to slip up at some point. You've got to expect a certain amount of generosity, I think, to have the guts to play like this. But it's dynamic play. There's dynamic B file, there's a dynamic G file. If you can just dismantle white on the king side later, this might not be so bad for black. You might not get to an endgame. The white king, might be slaughtered before the endgame comes. So rook e8. Okay, so knight e3. So the f5. Okay, because now with that rook e8's defending that bishop, there's no knight f5 tricks. Knight c4, queen b8. So putting pressure on that pawn triangle for the moment. So look at that, and look at this g file coming up. It's quite spectacular what happens here. White was Judith Polgar 2658. This is a game I've covered before, maybe some time ago on YouTube, if you want to do a search. So knight a4, this was in the year 2000. Weekends chorus A. So knight a4, queen b4, okay, forcing white to try and, well, has to defend both knights. Bishop f6. The bishops look quite dynamic. This bishop in particular, putting pressure on d4. Now rook g8, as though black potentially is going to double and maybe play f4 in the future. Queen c1, but actually rook g4 even better, attacking with tempo. d4, knight e5, and now this is taken. And it doesn't look so bad for white actually, from my point of view. That bishop e7, this pawn is kind of limiting the scope of white's own pieces. The semi-open file has been blocked by white's own pawn. The dynamism, the bite of white's position has been reduced significantly with the pawn on e5 here. And it looks as though white's king is a bit in trouble with this bishop fianchetto at any point is going to be exchanged off. So rook d3. And the rooks double ominously, and there's threat of f4 as well as taking off the bishop. Rook ed1, f4, starting to bite into white's king position. Queen c3, and Morozevich doesn't mind queens coming off. He plays f takes g3. Well, here of course the queen can't take because there's taking here or here. So takes. Pardon me, sorry, I've skipped ahead there. Whoops. Takes h takes g3, and now again attacking this triangle. h5 is going to again undermine. Bishop takes d5, weakening. These squares are now weakened, and this pawn structure is being healed up. Look at this pawn structure; it's looking pretty solid now. There's only two isolated pawns now. Rook f3, attacking f7, of course, rather artificially, perhaps you could argue. And it's here I thought this was a bit of a genius move, which you wouldn't expect. Rather strange. I wonder if you can guess black's next move here to defend this f7 pawn. Maybe it wasn't necessary actually. I'm not really sure I should be asking about this. I'm not sure this was necessary. It looks a bit elaborate. But maybe there is a reason technically that white might be threatening queen e3 if rook g7. But the move actually was king g7, strangely. Queen c7. And now h4, the attack continues. King g2, now hg. Now the queen over here, unfortunately, what about this stuff? Queen e4, pinning horribly. If the king moves, then rook takes g3 will be a threat if these rooks gang up on g3. Queen c3, check. And now rook g5, and of course there's a threat of mating. This has gone horribly wrong. The king's found itself in a mating net, and here Judith resigned. Now my head's starting to feel a bit hot. I'm not sure I can continue with other games, but we can do a quick overview of this game and maybe carry on next week with Morozevich part 2. So let's do a quick overview. This is on YouTube in more detail. If you search for Kingscrusher Morozevich, you'll find this game in detail, more detail analysed with some engine variations as well. But so in the burn variation with a6 is worth attention, I think, as it solves some strategic issues which b6 has with it. So castling, but both sides castle on the king side, and it seems black was able to undermine white's king safety gradually, doubling up rooks gradually. Now this must be unpleasant for this semi-open file not to mean anything, that a pawn's there, and black has got no obvious targets apart from he's making an obvious target, this f7, but it doesn't exist in this position, so its own attack is being hijacked technically. The f7 wasn't an obvious target before that, but it just becomes apparent that f3 is made use of with this bishop d5, because otherwise rook f3 is impossible anyway. So maybe that was Judith's idea, that she's going to attack f7. So it's worth considering analytically why king g7 is a key move here. But it seems to be king g7 is a key move to do with this f7 problem. Okay, so queen c7, and white's position just collapses here. The queen's not even attacking the bishop, of course. Queen's protecting the bishop at the moment. Queen e4. So the queen can take here, and we didn't make a note of this, but it didn't, because I think rook takes g3. Actually, okay. Let's have a quick look at this. Queen takes e7 would have been refuted. How? I'm not sure it's rook g3. Maybe just check here at a minimum, because that would at least like take on d1. Queen e2, and maybe here rook takes g3 just to carry on an attack, unveil an attack, and then, you know, like mates on the h file is pretty good. So anyway, the queen trotted back here, and it's a bit horrible now that black still got the attack, and so white resigns here. So I thought those games were all pretty good fun. I hope you enjoyed them. I'll be uploading this to YouTube. Okay, thanks very much. If you're on Play Chess, yeah, hope you enjoyed that, and on stream, hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed it anyway, so that's the main thing. Sorry, no, just kidding. No, I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'll see you. I'll see you next week then. Okay. All right. Thanks very much. Until next week.